How's everybody doing this morning? Major seed alert. Who knows about the major seed alert? Raise your hand. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I just want to say thank you for allowing us to have the space here today to be able to talk a little bit about what we do. We've been on a fantastic journey starting, in about 2007, and we at some point realized that there's just a lot of things that need to happen in order for us to move forward as far as farming goes, and we're going to share those with you today. So sit back, relax, have a good time, be prepared to laugh, and let's go on this journey.
Indeed.
How does it, is that the cue?
Should I push the green button?
Okay, green button, okay, cool, thank you so much. All right. This is the first time we've done a co-presentation, so we're gonna, we're gonna play off of each other a little bit. Yeah, we're gonna work out. So I'm sure you've seen these two people before. But as we go here, we're going to kind of just start with a little bit of history so that you can find out how we kind of got, to where we are today to even think about farming from our backgrounds. So we're going to start out with the early years. Go ahead, Judith.
So in my early years, growing up, I often think about the foods that we had available on our table. And there wasn't many opportunities to eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. In fact, most of the time we ate vegetables, they came out of a can. And I remember Mom would put some salt and pepper on them, maybe a half a stick of butter, depending on what it was. And, every once in a while, we might have some fresh greens, fresh collards or whatnot. And the other thing that I remember about growing up is we used to fry a lot. And we would fry so much. In fact, Mom, we used to keep that can of Crisco oil. Anybody know what I'm talking about? That can of Crisco oil by the side of the stove that you would recycle the oil, because money was tight and you had to strain the floaties out from last week's frying. So those are some of the things that I remember growing up. But I also remember I'm the third of 4 sisters. And my older sister, I remember about the time she was in her late teens, early 20s, I want to say she was about between 19 and 21. My family told me that, she had been diagnosed with diabetes. And being young, there wasn't a lot of conversation about what exactly that was or what caused it. But through the years, I really saw her start to struggle with that illness. And by the time she turned 50, she had already experienced at least 30 surgeries. And most of those surgeries, if not all of them, were diet related.
All right, so my early years are pretty much the same. I remember the Crisco on the side of the stove. And my dad, he affectionately jokes with me today because he talks about how complex my eating habits are. Because, he used to be able to feed me with a pack of hot dogs, a loaf of bread, and macaroni and cheese, of course, and you put like half of the stick of Velveeta in it so it can, be real creamy and cheesy. And so those were my type of eating habits as well. We had vegetables every now and then, which I didn't care too much for, out of a can. And so the results of this, similar to what Judith has, is that in 1986, my mom had breast cancer for the first time. She's went on to have it 4 more times. And also in about the year 2000, my dad, he was diagnosed with, actually what happened is that he kept coughing. he kept coughing. They had this cough that was reoccurring. And he kept going to the doctor trying to figure out what was wrong with it. They told him, oh, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And then one day somebody took to give him a test and they found out that he had kidney cancer. In fact, that because of the fact that they didn't catch it, that when they did the surgery, his whole entire kidney was cancerous at that point. And because of the fact it was rubbing up against his lung, then that's why he was coughing. So my dad he took out his kidney. And so, those are some of the things that happen. And for me, I guess it kind of scared me to death, but I can say that at the same time that it scared me to life because I started to really take a look at food. And so that's kind of like the cultivation of the mindset of looking at food and wanting to know more about food and wanting to see, how food plays a big role in health. So now let's talk a little bit about our first seeds.
We got to go there, huh?
Right.
So, like Chanowk, I had a daughter, and I wanted to start to look at changing my eating habits. And growing up, my mother was really into herbs and herbalism. It was something I've always grown up with. A lot of times we'd go to the doctor and we'd get the diagnosis, and we'd go home and she's picking twigs and going in the cupboard and, here, baby, take this and let me rub this on you and let me put the vinegar on your forehead. I don't know if you know all those old remedies to break your fever. But that's what I gravitated to, and I decided to try my hand at growing some herbs. And I think I picked about 3 or 4 different herbs, mostly culinary, but a couple of them that I knew had medicinal value, and I really wanted to bring that into the kitchen and bring those memories of my mother into the kitchen. And it didn't go well. I planted them, and they looked beautiful. I put them in my windowsill, and about a few weeks later, those herbs was crispy. And I couldn't understand what happened. I did everything right. I watered them. I did everything right, but they didn't make it.
And so I was going through a similar experience on the other side of town. I'm a IT person by trade. I did IT from 2000 to 2011, so I did my time sitting in a cubicle. And of course, during that time, we know about what happened in 2007, 2008. We know it as the crash. And really, and just quickly, I didn't get into growing food to become an urban farmer. That's kind of just something that kind of happened a little later on down the road, which I'll talk about. But the real reason why I wanted to grow food is because I knew at some point that our government was going to shut down, and I wasn't going to have access to some of the basic services. And I was like, I need to learn how to grow my own food because I just didn't know how to do it. And if you have 9 children and you're trying to eat organic, then you can imagine how much money that is per month. So it was really, okay, we got this big food bill. We've got the crash going, so I want to start growing food in the backyard. So that's what I did. I, took 35 square feet in the backyard, which you'll see, and then I just, put some plants in. And if you've ever dug up some soil and put your plants in, it looks all wonderful and happy, and you got the plants, they're all, everything's perfect. Well, in 2 weeks, everything was dead. And the reason why they were dead, and I look back at it and kind of seem a little foolish, because nobody starts a garden in Sacramento in July.
We had a lot to learn.
Well, we had a lot to learn. But when you're in an environment constantly where if it gets too hot, you turn on the air conditioner, it gets too cold, you turn on the heater, you have no idea about natural cycles and when you're supposed to do anything. And so there was a failure that took place at that time. And so, and then at about right around that time is when Judith and I met. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about the Yisrael Family Farm, it's also a story about love. It's a story about relationship. It's a story about, Father Sky and Mother Earth, right? Which we personify in some ways, in many ways, I think. And so at the same time, after that failure, I went and took a class in Northern California And there was a guy there at this class. Some of y'all know him. His name's John Jeevens. That's the first class that I took. And he said, forget about the plants. It's all about the soil. And so that actually started me. And I was like, because at that point I was ready to give up. And so with that, I said, okay, I'm going to come back to Sacramento. And then, oops, there's the next slide. The answers are in the soil. Okay. I'm supposed to do that part. But anyways, I came back to Sacramento, and I was like, you know, we're really going to do this, and we really started to grow food. But
Wait.
Go. Okay.
Actually, what had happened was
All right, you're going to tell. All right, fine.
he came back and he said, we're going to start a farm. I said, we're going to start a farm. You know we live in the hood, right? He was like, yeah, we're going to start a farm. And he was, that's what he said. And I was like, okay, that's what's going to happen.
And so this is how we started. This is our little small and humble beginnings. So as you look at this, I want you to understand where we're coming from here. Because if you notice, the only place where things aren't growing is in the beds. Right? That's the only place things aren't growing, is in the beds when we first started.
Right.
So, you know, we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. However, after going to that class and taking a few other classes, places like I've taken classes at Sowerborn Farms, and, you know, different readings and all those types of things, we were able to get the hang of things.
Yep.
So, you know, we started doing a little something. And so if you see here, you know, we had beds. We started out with raised beds, 5 by 20. We had like 10 or 12 of those types of beds. Of course, now we've changed. We have regular size rows and things of that nature because we're moving into more of a production type of agriculture to do CSAs and things. But, you know, we had, you know, beets and greens and cabbage, and we got bees in the back.
We even had bees, yeah.
Yeah, we're doing it, you know. We're doing it.
Doing some
and so
things.
this is right about the time of around 2011 or so. And 2011 is when I left my job. I left my corporate job because this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And not looking at it from farming, but looking at it as a lifestyle. Whatever I was going to do, agriculture was going to form the center of it in some way, shape, or form. And I had no idea what that was going to look like. So then, you know, bam, one day I was, you know, just like you walk into a business and they've got their first dollar bill, you know, that's framed on the thing. This is the first time that I ever actually harvested about 110 pounds of produce out of my backyard here.
That's such a magical day.
That was such a magical day. But then talk about how that works in the kitchen.
Right. So Chanowk would come in with, you know, barrels and wheelbarrows full of things. Like, I got some cucumbers. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know, just set them in the kitchen counter. And I walk outside, and there's like 30 pounds of cucumbers. Like, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah, I didn't know about crop planting at that point. You know, everything was like harvesting at one time.
So there's two things I had to learn. One is I had to change what I was doing in the kitchen. Because, you know, as you can see, he's bringing in eggplant, ping tung. What's a ping tung eggplant? What do I do with it? And how do I make it in a way that the children are going to enjoy it and eat it? And then we had all these melons and cucumbers. So I remember us deciding that we were just going to call up some friends, put it out in the neighborhood, and invite people over and teach them how to pickle. I had to learn how to can, and I had to learn other skills to help preserve some of the harvests.
But that's not all that we learned. And so as we started to grow food in the backyard, of course, back in the old days, you want to have a lot of children because they need to help you work on the farm. So we started to pull the children outside, and, you know, sometimes against their will. Sometimes we had to entice them and give them all kinds of treats, but we did get them out there, and we started to work together in the garden. And then, of course, you're working in the garden, so then you start to cook together. So now all of our children from 12, or at that time, almost 4 and 5 at that point. Everybody knew how to use a knife. Everybody knew how to cook, can put a meal together.
Right.
And then, and on top of that, we started to eat together. So instead of spending hours and hours in the house, we're now eating outside and spending most of our time outside when the weather permits. So
Absolutely.
we saw that food and growing food extends far beyond just eating. And I think that that was one of our aha moments.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And in 2012, our then Mayor Kevin Johnson proclaimed Sacramento to be the farm to fork capital of the world, which I think is the Milky
nation?
Way. The Milky Way.
Right, right. And so what this did for us is, because up until that point, people were laughing at us. Even people with large farms would laugh at us because they would just say, oh, ha, 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 you're not a farmer. We got those comments. But then at the same time, people in our neighborhood would laugh at us too, because they're like, you know, they got other things to do than be worried about some people growing food and things of that nature. Friends, family, I have friends now that are like, okay, I believe you now. But back then it was like, you guys are crazy. You're leaving these corporate jobs to do what?
And Chanowk used to always say, they'll laugh now, but then they'll copy. Because remember, this is before it was cool, right?
Yeah, this is before it was cool. So that's a little bit about what happened. So then 2012 happened, Farm to Fork Capital happened, and so people started to take notice of some of the things that we were doing. So in 2015, we got an award from the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority for sustainability and stewardship. Then in 2016, Judith was on the cover of Edible Sacramento as an emerging food leader. And then right around 2016, when we were trying to get the ordinance passed in Sacramento to make it legal to grow food and sell it in the front yard, along with various other partners, we'll talk about in a little while, we were on the cover of Sacramento News and Review. And most recently, we were on the cover of Comstock's magazine, talking a little bit about some of the things that we were doing in the community. But, go ahead. Do you want to clap again? Okay. I don't want to cut you off.
Go ahead.
And so that's a little bit of how we got to where we are. But what's even more important of talking about how we got to where we are is where we are. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So Oak Park is a suburb. It's actually the first suburb in Sacramento. Was it the first or one of the first?
First.
I think it was the first suburb in Sacramento. It was established in 1889. And it was a culturally thriving community. It was the destination neighborhood. However, in the 1960s, the neighborhood started to decline. And in the 80s and 90s, it began to decline even further due to the crack epidemic.
All right, so of course, if you don't know about the crack epidemic, then you probably should look up a guy named Gary Webb, because he had some very great insights about that, because basically much of that crack that came into black neighborhoods across the nation was based on selling drugs to be able to raise money for the Contra War at that time.
Right.
So I want you to understand that, because it's going to connect to something else that we're going to talk about. But as of now, depending on who you ask, South Oak Park is known for different things, but here's what I know it for. Fast food restaurants, corner stores, and empty lots. And at some point, we used to call that a food desert, right? But as we so heard from Karen Washington, our elder, we're not even talking about a food desert. We're talking about food apartheid. And why? Because it's a created condition. And we're going to talk about that just real quick for if you've never heard that, so you can understand what we're dealing with here. Because this is one of the main challenges of why not why we can't, but one of the reasons why it's hard for us to do what we do where we are. This is a picture of Chicago. And if you look at the picture here, you'll see the shaded areas. Those are the areas where African Americans live. in high concentrations. So when you see the areas that have the little triangles, the black triangles, those are places where school actions take place, which means things like school closings, schools that are underperforming, et cetera, et cetera. Please burn that into your mind real quick because you'll see it again on the next slide. So same Chicago. If you notice the places where they have the big circles, the big brown circles, those are places where there's a lot of people being killed. Drive-by shootings, gang violence, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at these are the same places where the high percentages of African Americans, as well as the same places where the school closings are taking place, right? And then, once again, same Chicago. So as you see the red areas, those are the places that are also called food deserts. So we have school closings, we have all those different types of things, school actions, underperforming schools. We have high rates of killings, as well as we have food deserts. Are they connected? Absolutely. So this condition is replicated all the way throughout from California to New York in our communities. So this is the type of conditions that we have to be in order to try to figure out where to get healthy produce.
Right.
All right? And so, this is where the Yisrael Family Urban Farm comes in. And so our mission is to transform the hood for good using urban agriculture to engage, employ, and empower our community. And so we do that in 3 ways. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So one of the ways we do that is by growing food on a farm. And in these pictures that you see here, there's a family. We have pop-up farm stands. Since the ordinance passed, it's now legal for us to sell food, which Chanowk will talk about in a little bit. Here's a picture of Chanowk and a local youth. Chanowk does a lot of mentoring to youth in the neighborhood, and this was actually Unique, who spent a few weeks with us and was learning how to grow food and learning a lot about agriculture.
And we don't stop there. We also teach people how to grow their own food.
Right.
Because we're okay with losing customers to them learning how to grow their own food.
Absolutely.
That's a good thing for us.
So this picture shows us after we installed a garden in the backyard of someone in our community, and the volunteers, they were just very pleased with their work. It's always a very fulfilling thing when you can stand back and just see your work.
Also, just to add that this year we've got some things that are very exciting for us. We're in the process of adding cold storage. We're in the process of putting in a GAP certified washing station so that we can debut our first CSA. So we're doing that too as well. We also grow people.
Yes.
Go ahead.
We grow people. So one of the ways we do that is through edible education. So as I mentioned before, as we started to grow food and I started to rekindle my relationship with food, I had to learn how to use different things such as kale. So I take that experience out into the community and we show people how to grow and teach them how to cook. So here's a picture of a class that we did with the youth at a local community center, and they're just so excited. The youth love to cook. We also have our Project Good program, where GOOD is an acronym for Growing Our Own Destiny. And we take youth from the neighborhood and the community, and it's a summer immersion program where they learn how to cultivate the land, cultivate themselves, and cultivate the community. And we actually have some of our youth in the audience today, so give it up for them.
And at 1:30 today, you'll be able to see them. We're going to talk. They're going to be able to talk. You'll be able to talk to them too as well. Okay. Are you going to talk about? Oh, you're not going to talk about that. We're running out of time.
Yeah.
So also we talk about growing community too as well. And so what we do is we do things such as harvests. For example, some people, in a panel that we just had, we talked about how do you get more people to be farmers and those types of things. And I said you don't. You just get them on the farm. Once you get people on the farm and they start to see nature, nature will do its job for you. You don't have to do it. So we found all different types of ingenious ways to get people on the farm. One of the ways is by offering free food. This is a harvest that we have at a site that's across the street. It's called Fruit Rich Community Collaborative, and we have cherries there. We usually do a cherry harvest. This other one here is a guy he's a Mayan, and we were doing a cacao ceremony at the farm. So other community residents who want to do things like that, we open up our space so that they can do it there. And as a result, those people leave with an understanding of nature and start to talk about growing their own food. And then, of course, this is another picture of the cherry harvest as well. And so the things that we do.
Another way that we grow community is through farm tours and field lessons. So we have youth groups that come out. We also have been involved with policy as well.
Through the Sacramento Urban Agriculture Coalition, we lobbied as well as talked to our local representatives to go about making it legal to grow food and sell it, because when we first started, we grew all this food and then we found out it was illegal. So we went about the process of learning how, one, to engage in politics, because that's never something that I wanted to do. But at the same time, it was a very enriching experience, and now in Sacramento City and County, you can grow food and then you can sell it in a farm stand. And this is just another event. We also invited people out to the farm to pull out some frames and actually eat honey right from the honeycomb. The children loved it. So ultimately, what we do, many of the things that we do are good for the planet, such as composting. We're not big enough to have a cow, so we have worms take the place of our cow. And we take all of our manure from our chickens and everything, throw them in there with the worms. We got a very large vermicompost system, and then they do their job. We have bees, and of course our neighbors, especially our close neighbors that are around us, they report that they have more fruit on their trees, especially when they see me out there running around the backyard, running from swarms of bees. They say thank you.
Thank you.
And then, of course, we have the chickens here, and we've got a pretty good relationship. They live in our orchard, and of course, being in the orchard is good because it keeps the hawks away.
Yes, indeed.
And then last but not least, we do make some profit. So we do some economic development too. Go ahead and talk about that.
Absolutely. So we make soap, and that's one of our products. So we use things that we grow on the farm, botanicals, to put into our soap. We also do, as we mentioned before, classes. So we do a lot of classes for people who want to start growing or don't know where to start, from composting to, again, cooking and herbalism classes as well. And we also do canning through our cottage food industry. So we're able to preserve some of the food and make jams and jellies and things like that. In addition to that, we've also been able to hire and employ some of our, actually one of our Project Good youth from, I think 3 years ago, is now an employee and works for us. And she's part of our production team with our value-added products.
Also, we've hired a recent graduate from UC Davis who started out with us as an intern, and she is now our educational coordinator.
She's in the audience, too.
She's in the audience somewhere, too. There she is. Okay, we'll skip that. So looking back at some of the things that we've talked about here and why we keep going, is that one, it's better to rely on Mother Nature than to depend on Lady Luck, right? That's one thing, that's one of the main things that we learned. We also learned that a couple of committed individuals can change the world, especially starting in the most unlikely place, which is the soil that's under your feet. And the last thing that we found is that if you're playing a solo game, you will always lose out to a team. And so what we'd like to do now is it's all about exposure, really. Because when I first started doing this, I've looked around, and if it wasn't for people like Soil-Borne Farms being there, in fact, I remember looking at Soil-Borne Farms back when they were at Hurley, And I was at a point to where I'm going to take my child out of my school and drive them so they can be in the Hurley school, that school where Hurley was, just so that he could have that access, right? So it was those type of exposures that planted seeds that, gave us doing what we're doing today, as well as being able to go to places like Raphael Gardens with Rudolph Steiner. I remember having several conversations with him way back before I was even growing anything, and the things that he told me are some of the things that keep me to doing what I'm doing today.
And as well as the Sacramento Natural Foods Co-op, who has also helped support our work and has been a partner with us.
Also, I also want to talk a little bit about a couple of other things that we're involved in, such as the California Farmer Justice Collaborative, which just recently had some legislation passed, which is called the Farmer Equity Act, which specifically talks about how farmers of color are able to access resources here in the agricultural climate in California. So that's something also too as well. So Paul Towers, if you're out there, I want to thank you too for your leadership in that. And so at the end of the day, the real thing is this. We thought we were going to start a business, but we actually started a revolution. And so the question to me is, or question to you is, are you ready for that revolution?
Are you ready? Are y'all ready?
Are you ready for a revolution? This is where it starts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.